When you're a sharer of your experience with the world, there's a couple of things that you got to look at, that you got to be cognizant of. First off, you have to be willing to show your flaws. You have to be willing to self examine. You have to be willing to say, I was wrong about this or I was wrong about that. And secondly, you have to be willing to uh, share something that is sacred to you, not just yourself, but, your experiences lead to, you know, thought patterns. It leads to your trauma, your pain, your pleasure, your um, triumphs and victories in life, your failures in life, but then also if someone else is involved in that experience, you're also exposing them as well. And for a long time after the mother of my youngest, after the relationship was over, I didn't want to share anything about my love life. I didn't want to share anything about the women that I was engaging with because I was so open about her and people loved our relationship, at least from what they could see on the surface. And for the first couple of years, it was amazing. We had an amazing relationship. Um, but a lot of what I have realized is not just where, she made mistakes, but where I made mistakes. And, where I have had to look in myself and say, I was wrong for making this decision, or I was wrong for leaving her at this time, or I was wrong for whatever. Um, and that's hard. It's hard when you talk about love the way I talk about love, when you place love as high on the pedestal as uh, I do, and you talk about it a lot in terms of relationships and intimacy and romance and all of those kind of things, you know, you think about, like, for example, when Steve Harvey came out with the book uh, Think Like a Man, right? And he had been through, I think it was three marriages or three divorces, and everybody was like, well, not everybody, but a lot of people were like, um, why would you listen to him? He been divorced three times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, to their credit, there's a point, they have a point with that. But at the same time, as a person who is dealing with the energy of trial and error in life, you cannot disregard the wisdom that comes with experience in relationships. Yeah, you might have gone through divorce three times or whatever, but you've also learned three major lessons, or one major lesson three different times, or whatever. Uh, and you can't knock someone for continuing to try. Most people say his perspective is not valid, and I'm not saying whether it is or isn't, but most people would say his perspective is not valid just because of the fact that he's been through so many relationships. But they speak that from the perspective of being afraid themselves to try again. And that is one thing that I can say that I have never been. I've never been afraid to try again. I've always known that love was for me. I've always known that love would be something that I would talk about because it is the foundation of who I am. And I'm not talking about just relationships. I'm not talking about romantic love or, sexual love, or even though all of these things are implied and included in the concept of love, but love itself, I know, is part of my ministry. It is part of my calling. It is part of my priesthood. It is part of who I am at my core. And to not talk about that because I've had a situation where it didn't last as long as I wanted it to, or where I made a mistake and, you know, uh, caused different things to happen, or didn't work hard enough at a particular thing, or didn't work on myself in a particular area, or whatever. Like, those things are informing my perspective on love. And people don't talk about how much failure is necessary in order for wisdom to be gained. People want to hear wisdom, but they don't want to know that it came from pain and trauma and failure. People want to hear, the good take, but they don't want it to come from someone who uh, had to be wrong at some point in order to figure out what was right. And, you know, as scary as that can be when you're thinking so much about public perception, when you shift your perspective and the way that you look at yourself and you see yourself as a human being, there is no getting past the human experience without failure, without pain, without heartache, without trauma. There's no getting to that point. There's no getting to the acceptance of self and the love of self and the forgiveness of self and the examination of self without going through some really fucked up situations. There's no way. You can't do it. It's not possible. And so, I got to a point where I said, you know what, fuck it. I'm going to tell my story. I'm going to tell it as raw as I can tell it without harming anyone and their reputation, without, being biased, and looking at all angles of a thing, and sharing what it is that I am learning, my human experience. My human experience is just as valid as the person's human experience who made no mistakes. Because the person who made no mistakes can only talk to the person who has not yet made any mistakes. Or they can talk to the person who has made mistakes, but they're not going to resonate as much as the person who has made mistakes talking to the person who has made mistakes. Because at that point, they're able to say they have been there. They have been where I am. So there's no getting around this. There's no getting around it. Not even a little bit, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to, share how I feel about that, because there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to go by.